In the previous panels, we highlighted the textual anomaly regarding the tsaras that was found in the home in which one lived, and in particular the statement that v'natati nega tsarat, that this tsarat was brought about by the actions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for which the obvious question was, why would an all-loving God afflict an individual with such a, at the time, calamitous disease? And furthermore, the wording here parts company from the wording used in the Chumash when introducing the other two forms of tsarat, that of the body and that of the clothing, where there the wording seems to indicate that the tsaras broke out without a direct act from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We looked at the Rambam's approach. This was somewhat from the standpoint of Drush, that the tsarat came as a response of the tearing part of a community through Lashon Hara, in whatever form that Lashon Hara takes. Rashi, as a general rule, adopts the Pshuta Shel Mikra approach. It seems in this situation there would be nothing in the text that would justify the Vanatati Nega Tsarat, and therefore turns to the Medrash that suggests that there was some form of a master plan involved with the tsarat developing in one's home, in that it enabled the individual to uncover valuables that had been secreted within the walls of the home by the previous owners. As with all Midrashic explanations, a certain degree of fine-tuning needs to be undertaken in teasing out the specific details. But overall the message was that, while on the surface this was a negative activity brought about by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ultimately there was a method to the madness. We now come to a third option to explain V'natati Nega Tsarat, God's involvement in bringing about this tsarat. This comes from the standpoint of the Kabbalah and fits into the fourth category of Torah interpretation, that of Sod. Keeping in mind that the focus of Midrash is to interpret the Torah text and the God-man relationship from the standpoint of man, as a general rule, Sod looks at the interaction from the standpoint of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and hence Kedusha, or the lack thereof, is a pivotal component in interpreting the text. In a commentary to Vayikra 51, the Zohar writes, and I paraphrase, that the religious practices of the Canaanite nation-state was one of Avodah Zarah, polytheism, the polar opposite to the belief of the Bnei Israel of a single force, monotheism, and therefore a Ruach Tumah, the antithesis to Kedusha, rested upon their homes, building on the assumption that the purpose for Yetziat Mitzrayim was to bring the nation to Eretz Israel, where they would serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This Ruach HaTumah posed somewhat of a problem, and therefore, according to the Zohar, V'natati Nega Tsarat Bebeit Eretz Achuzasachem, God caused the Tsarat to break out in their homes, in order that the Bnei Israel should demolish the existing building and rebuild with new building supplies, as prescribed by the Torah, Vayikra 14:42, V'lakhu avanim acherot. They were to procure and bring other blocks of stone, bricks, which were to be used to replace the original building material. They were to take other mortar dust and replaster the walls of the house. This was Kadesh Bnei Yisrael Yaduru, that the nation on an individual level should dwell in a state of B'kedusha, of holiness, or B'diura Kadisha, in homes that were holy, in other words, not impacted by the Ruach HaTumah of the original owners, which on the surface, when one steps back and analyzes the two explanations, they would appear to be polar opposite and somewhat mutually exclusive of each other. According to Rashi, the ultimate intent of God's bringing about a tsarat that required destruction of the home was motivated by Ribui Hatov, an abundance of good. Unfortunately, this good required a certain degree of angst and trauma. The Zohar, on the other hand, suggests that the catalyst for the bringing of the tsarat was the Omek Hara'ah, the intensity and the depth of the Ruach HaTumah, and the need to remove that Ruach HaTumah from Eretz HaKadosha. And while on the surface the two positions would appear to be mutually exclusive, the Rebbe in footnote number 14 maintains that in reality they are complementary, each addressing a different aspect in the God-man relationship. In words of the Rebbe in the footnote, Kedemukach b'Zohar Sham, from the wording of the Zohar, it would appear that She'enam Beit Pirushim, to Pligi, that the two explanations are not in conflict. Rather, Shebeshvil Beit Ta'amim, Ba Hatzarat Bebatim, that there were two motivating factors that caused the tzarat to appear in the homes. And those two forces, according to some commentators to the Zohar, suggest that there were two forms that the tzarat took, one possibly more severe than the other, where the intent of one was to bring about a degree of angst and physical pain, while another set of symptoms for the tzarat brought about a positive outcome that resulted in a financial benefit to the new owners. As noted, all Midrashic and particularly Zoharic interpretations need to be fine-tuned and nuanced. One clear distinction between the two positions would be the question as to whether or not the tzarat of the housing afflicted each and every single home in the Eretz Israel, or was it selective? The argument of the Zohar that it was to remove the Ruach HaTumah would suggest that the tzarat of the homes, as with epidemics of today, affected a sizable percentage of the population, whereas if the tzarat, as the Rambam suggests, that it was linked to one's violation of Torah law in the form of, for example, Lashon Hara, then the saturation would be far more limited. According to Rashi, it might be suggested that it was a means to provide a particular family with an increase in wealth, then this would be restricted to selected individuals.